Adventures of Ellen White and the Pioneers. How a Stone Changed Ellen's Life.
Shh. Ellen is still very sick, cautioned Ellen's worried mother whenever anyone would enter the room where Ellen was. For 3 weeks Ellen had lain unconscious, too sick to know anybody or to know what was happening. Even though she was 9 years old, a special big cradle was made for her after the accident, so she would not fall out of bed and hurt herself more. Many of those who saw her felt that she would not live much longer. But Ellen's mother had been praying. She'd been praying that Ellen would live. Ellen's mother was a sincere Christian and a great believer in prayer and in the Bible. She believed such promises as we read in James 5:15. And the prayer of faith shall save the sick, and the Lord shall raise him up. Isn't that a comforting promise? And there was another good promise for Ellen's mother to claim in Matthew 21:22. And all things, whatsoever ye shall ask in prayer, believing, ye shall receive. Ellen's mother did believe. She knew that God does hear our prayers, because the Bible says so in 1 Peter 3 verse 12. For the eyes of the Lord are over the righteous, and his ears are open unto their prayers. God somehow impressed Ellen's mother with the feeling that Ellen would not die. About 3 weeks after the accident, Ellen finally became conscious again. She even began to notice people around her. Ellen thought she'd only been asleep. She did not remember the terrible accident. But one day she heard a friend ask her mother if she had talked to Ellen about dying. "What a pity," said one woman as she looked at Ellen. "I would not have known her," said the other woman. And Ellen wondered, what could they mean? Why are they so sorry for me? Do I look different for some reason? Then she asked, "What has happened to me, Mother?" Then her mother told her about the accident. "A few weeks ago, you and Elizabeth, your twin sister, and one of your schoolmates were walking home from school. Suddenly, someone shouted, and looking back you saw a larger girl about 13 years old running and calling out in an angry voice. So you 3 girls started to run fast to get away from the girl to avoid any trouble. You girls were almost across the park when the girl shouted again, and you looked back to see how close she was. And just as you turned back, the girl threw a stone which she had in her hand. You cried out in pain as that stone struck you full force in the face and caused you to fall down. They carried you to a nearby store, and a very kind man offered to take you home in his buggy. But you said no. You thanked him and told him that you felt strong enough now to walk home. Your face and clothes were all bloody, and so you did not want to stain this man's buggy. So you started to walk with Elizabeth holding one arm and your schoolmate holding the other arm. But you were so weak and dizzy that you fainted, and the girls had to carry you home. Then Ellen asked her mother for a looking glass, a mirror, so she could see how she looked. And when she saw herself in the mirror, she was shocked. Her nose was broken, her face was pale, her eyes weak, and her whole nervous system was upset from the heavy blow of that stone, and she was very thin after being unconscious for 3 whole weeks. Her face looked completely different. "Oh, do I really look like this?" Ellen thought. "Surely this could not be the round, healthy, smiling face that I always have seen in the mirror before." Indeed, it was a pity, as that woman had said. Ellen felt so sad when she looked at her face in the mirror that she almost wished that she could die. She was very unhappy, and then the thought came to her that maybe she would die, and she became frightened because she felt that she was not ready to die. Ellen prayed that if she were going to die now, that God would forgive her sins and make her ready for heaven. After Ellen had prayed, she felt much happier, and a great peace came into her heart, and she loved everyone. She even loved the girl who had hit her with the stone, and Ellen felt sorry for her. Ellen gained her strength slowly and was at last able to get up, although she was still very weak. At the time of the accident, Ellen's father, Mr. Harmon, was away on a business trip. It was several months before he came home, so he was anxious to see his children.
Daddy! Daddy! Daddy!
And when he came into the house, he hugged Ellen's brother and he hugged her sisters. And then he looked about for her, but she stood off by herself, very shyly. "Where is Ellen?" he asked. "There she is," said her mother, pointing to where she stood. And he looked over at Ellen, and then he looked back at his wife. "Surely this is not my little Ellen," he thought. It seemed to him that the pale, thin little girl with the disfigured face, who stood so quietly all by herself, could not be his once happy, healthy daughter Ellen. Although Ellen smiled at her father when he hugged her, she felt inside that her heart would break at the thought that not even her own father recognized her. Poor Ellen, she felt so lonely and sad. But this only caused Ellen to draw closer to Jesus, because she knew that Jesus still loved her, even though her face was no longer pretty, and she would ask Jesus to help her have a pretty character that would fit her for heaven. Come and join us next time to hear what happens when Ellen finally goes back to school